growth has been a build-up from the last quarters. Looking at quarter 1, 10.4% growth, right. Quarter 2, I think 6.8%, then quarter 3, 7.7%, and quarter 4, 9.6%. So you would say the growth has been really good for this year compared to 2017. And the growth is driven by the main sectors as usual: agriculture, industry, and services. Where for agriculture, the annual growth also has been 4.4%. For industry, 10%, and for services, 9%. To start with the service sector, which accounts for about 42% of the economy, right. We see that there's been growth, especially when it comes to trade and transport, but specifically when it comes to wholesale and retail trade. Right. And we have also seen growth in hotel and in hotel industry, which kind of you would say is tourism. Right. And that would be the main drivers of the growth under services of 9%. Right. But when you also come to industry, we see that construction has really picked up, especially for this year compared to last year. Right. Where we've had a growth of 14%. And as well as manufacturing, which also had a growth of 11%. So under industry, it's mainly construction and manufacturing. Right. Whereas under services, it's mainly wholesale trade and tourism or hotels and industry.
Right. You're talking about industry mainly, and I want to touch base with it. Of course, when you track back the numbers here from at least 2016, it's been somewhere between 16 growth. Only in 2015 and 2014, we saw a 17% growth there. Just kindly drive us into this. We, of course, saw a slowdown, but now that you're saying it's picking up, what are the main contributors?
Yeah, as I said, construction mainly. We saw that in 2017, right. There was a slowdown. There was a transition from a peak period around 15-16, as you said. So 15-16, there were quite a number of big projects which were kind of coming to the end, right. I'd say. And then 17, there wasn't much in terms of the main construction activities. Right. And therefore, we saw quite, I think, one of the quarters we actually had a growth of -2%. But then we see that towards the end of 2017 and beginning first quarter of 2018, there are several activities, construction activities. And when you say construction, it includes roads as well, right. Main construction projects, but as well as the household construction activities, because that drives in so much use of various construction materials, and that's why we see that big peak. But for industry, we see the effect of the Made in Rwanda policy. Right. So again, around 16, 17, part of 17, we see that there was quite very low growth, to about 2 to 3% in industry. But then with the Made in Rwanda policy, we see textiles especially picking up, and other activities that have picked up in food processing, and that from right somewhere last quarter of 2017 to these last quarters of 2018, industry has also been quite influenced by manufacturing, especially food processing.
Right. From a food production perspective, speak to me on we understand that Rwanda is heavily relying on agricultural exports, and that is tea and coffee. But what was the performance when you bring it back into the quarters, mainly quarter 4 there?
Quarter 4 specifically, there was actually a decrease of 4% compared to the last quarter, 2017. So comparing the quarters, we do understand that the reason for this decrease in growth for agriculture exports is attributed to 2 things. One, there was a decrease in output itself, especially for tea. Right. Tea is heavily dependent on amount of rainfall, so that the richness of the leaves and therefore the output can always be affected by any slight changes in terms of climate. But also we see that we understand also the prices for tea and coffee as well went down, the international prices. And when that happens, it affects the amount of output, because depending on where that slowdown in prices started, which I understand somewhere from Q2 of the year, it affects the following quarters in terms of what is really brought out for export. So those two reasons in terms of output itself, but also prices, affected the overall growth of exports.
Still on food there, we did see the president just 2 weeks ago on the citizen outreach in Nyamagabe in the southern province, and they reiterated more on the production of wheat to also increase the production in that particular area. Currently, what are we looking at as exports and imports for wheat and wheat flour itself?
I think for the last number of years, 3 to 5, we've seen industries set up processing wheat and other whole basket of flours, and the production, the domestic production, is not being sufficient. But to cover their needs, we've also seen imports of wheat from various countries, and I think the ideal situation would be that if you can have sufficient produce from the country, which can feed into these industries. And I think that's where I think the call was coming from, in terms of encouraging the various farmers, especially in those districts which are more favorable to wheat, to be able to produce enough, which can always be taken on by these industries.
Ivan, one other thing that I want us to touch base with is the beverages and tobacco. We came from a terrible Q1 of 2018 and -2. And this was not even the worst, because we've seen -7s even way before. But what are the current trends? Because we're seeing a growth on that. And of course, from Q2, Q3, Q4, there has been an upward trend. What is necessarily driving this?
Yeah, we've seen that from Q2, growth in beverages and tobacco of 8%, then Q3 15%, and the last Q4 of 14%. I would say it could be attributed to 2 or 3 things. The inputs, the availability of inputs, greatly helps in terms of, especially the beverages, the usage of sorghum and other agricultural outputs which are fed into the production of beverages. With a good season in agriculture, or good output in agriculture, it makes those inputs more available. And that's the main reason one would say to this.